Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I thought I'd take the stairs because I'm wearing very high heels. Actually, I'm not. They're very low. Good to see you. Fantastic. And thank you for that introduction, Shona. And would you please welcome, really, very well, our 2012 winner of the Archibald, Tim Storrier.
Thank you very much.
So, Tim, I know you've been hung once before in the Archibald, maybe a year or two ago, but this is obviously your first win, so congratulations. Tell me what this week has been like for you.
Well, it was rather disappointing, really, because the dog stole the show. And I thought the dog was going to be rather shy. The dog's not shy at all. The dog actually loved it. So, it's interesting that an animal does that. It's quite touching, really.
Tell me a bit about Smudge, because I mean, you actually saved Smudge, didn't you?
No, I didn't save Smudge. Smudge was saved by a woman in Bathurst who's the almost comically called the dog catcher, because she works for the pound, called Margaret Gall, and the dog had originally was called I think Rita or something like that, but it ate a guinea pig called Scooter, and the execution order was out, and Margaret brought her around, and it was such a funny looking dog. It had a long black nose and black eyes, and it was very alert, and it reminded me very much of a dog I had as a child. So she picked the right address, but she always knows which address to take a forlorn dog to, Margaret Gall. She's very talented.
I'm glad to hear that Smudge was saved. Tell me, Tim, I mean, I've been listening to a few of your interviews over the week, and you talk about how you're not that comfortable about winning prizes, particularly at this level, like the Archibald. Why is that?
Oh, well, look, I think it's probably, it's a more comfortable position not to win, in the sense that one is still striving. I mean, and also there are some, rather disturbing, if you like, or I'm uncomfortable with some of the parameters of an art prize anyway. I mean, when you think about the idiosyncratic nature of a lot of the expressions in these prizes, at this level, you're talking people with pretty high caliber talent and expertise, to be then judged above others as a little more worthy. Well, that's a judgment that's subjective, and it's made by committee, which probably saves it to a degree. But the criticism would still be valid if it was made by one judge, I think. However, having said that, well, there's not a lot to be said for coming second in this prize, is there? Or any other prize, really, or any race. So, although it's imperfect, just the publicity alone that it brings to the arts community, flawed as that is as well, I think is a very good thing.
Can we go back to the very first prize that you won, which was when you were 19 years old and you picked up the Sulman Prize? And I was listening to an interview with you where you were talking about the fact that when you found out about it, you were actually jackarooing at the time. Is that right?
Yes. I wasn't a very good one. I didn't like getting up in the morning, and I didn't like digging fence holes, and I didn't like skinning rabbits, and I didn't like blackberries, and I really was a total failure. But yes, I hadn't.
So why didn't you stick at it? I don't understand.
Well, I didn't. I was told to. I was waiting to go to the National Art School, and so I had 9 months of it. And,
yep. And so you found out that you won the Sulman Prize at this time, and what was that picture? Were you happy with it? Was it a good picture at this time?
Well, that again is a subjective judgment. For me, I was. Looking back on it, it was quite influenced by Francis Bacon to a degree, I think. And it uses purple, which is, anybody that knows anything about painting, is an extremely dangerous colour to use.
Have you used it much since?
No.
No. Okay.
So really, it was a poison chalice in some ways. And of course, in those days, I turned up here for the announcement straight out of the car, really, from Coolah, where I was.
Did you have a dog then too?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, a dog called Charlie, a spaniel. But the thing was that it was in that court over there because none of this was here. all this was being renovated for the first time. And so I didn't ever get to see the participants at all. So I really don't know. It was judged by David Strawn, who had worked all his life as an artist, but he'd survived by teaching. And as I said the other night, shortly after he'd achieved independence financially so he could paint professionally, he was killed in a head-on collision in a car. It was an awful coincidence, really. Terrible.
Can we talk about the winning portrait? Is that okay? Yeah, all right. It's called The Histrionic Wayfarer after Bosch. Describe the painting that inspired it, that Bosch did, The Wayfarer, from, I think it was 1510, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not too sure that it's in the museum in Rotterdam. I've never seen it, but it's quite small. It's an octagonal shape. It's about 70 centimetres in diameter. It's a biblical story. There's the prodigal son, the wandering pilgrim. Nobody's quite sure, and the individual is going right, could be going left, appears to be going right, avoiding what looks like a pub or a brothel in the background, towards a bullock, which in those days was regarded as a symbol of, I think, stubbornness and goodness.
Still is, isn't it?
But it is, yeah, well, you know. Yeah. But I don't know even why I suddenly remembered this painting. It just occurred to me.
Is it because, I mean, you're saying it's like the road, you either go left or right, it's between virtue and vice. I mean,
It's not quite as severe as that. More like the Robert Frost poem, you know, I think it's called The Road, is it The Road Less Taken? The Road Less Travelled?
I'll just quote it for you because I have an infinite knowledge of Robert Frost poems. I'm just kidding. Tell me about the poem.
Well, at the end of it, of course, is that
I can do T.S. Eliot.
It chose the less used road, and that makes all the difference.
Yep.
So it tends to deal with that a bit.
And what interests you about this idea, though, thematically, as an artist? Like, why pick up on that picture?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. It was an attempt also to just put a figure in a landscape, which I'd been doing just with clothes, and to make the figure have a dynamism that I hadn't tried before. And that's a kind of an interesting technical question. I mean, it started out with some initial drawings about 10 by 15 centimetres, but in the end, because I worked from memory, the whole thing really I gridded it up on the canvas and then started to relate it to the drawing, but it didn't work at all. So really it was done on the arc of the diver, to use a term. It's done on the arabesque, so that the leg itself, you could see if you had a piece of chalk on a wall where you pull the leg down like that. So it's got that Lloyd Rees, they say, Robert Hughes used to call it the Sydney line, which is an arabesque. It's a term of indictment in Melbourne. It is. It's called the Charm School, you see.
Just back to the idea of the traveller, I mean, and as you say, the Robert Frost, you know, the poem, The Road Less Travelled, I wonder, is this a reflection, I know it's a self-portrait, but the actual position itself of this artist, the arabesque, etc., is this a juncture where you're at as an artist, as a person?
Oh, no, those...
This is a counselling
those
session.
intersections were passed years ago. This one, it's actually self-parody, if that's not a tautology. Parody. It's meant to be ironic, and curiously enough, it's meant to be reasonably humorous in the sense that it's not meant to be taken as a serious metaphor. However, metaphorically, of course, it's an old metaphor, the idea of Sisyphus carrying the weight of the world on its shoulders. But very little of it's based on any kind of fact whatsoever, with the exception of the dog. But, a question that I was actually quite surprised that very few people asked it, because to me it seems to be so obvious that what on earth is this mythical individual doing carrying a red funnel?
Yes.
And the fact is that the answer to it is, well, there's no real reason except that I own a really early automotive funnel that's the most beautiful shape and colour. And so really it's loaded down with things that I like to paint. Yeah, including a banana, you know, which I read.
You like painting bananas?
I do.
Do you just like painting them? What about eating them?
Yeah, but there's an interesting thing with bananas if you paint them, because they include just about the whole range of yellow.
Yeah.
You know, so you talk about Indian yellow, cadmium yellow, chrome yellow possibly. And then you've got to glaze them, and then you've got to make them a bit grubby with a little bit of this and that. So I've always enjoyed painting them. You know, they're a strangely satisfying thing to work on.
Any other fruit that you like painting? Is pineapples difficult?
Yes, no, technically too difficult.
Star fruit are hard.
No, I like painting peaches. They're interesting to paint because you get the where you've got to grade the pinks and the greens into a spherical shape. Again, something I really like to do, and the whole silly sort of gantry of these pretensions, of which they're a reflection of my enormous pretensions, and I was trying to explain how awful carrying these pretensions really are. If you catch my drift.
You know, I do. Weighed down by your own pretensions.
That's silliness.
But that sounds terrible, almost.
Well, the good thing about it is that it's not reality, is it?
Yeah.
You know.
So do you think that in many ways it's important to have that parody, not to take yourself too seriously, even though it seems serious because you've called the work after Bosch? I mean, that sounds pretty damn serious to me, but at the end of the day, it's important for you to have that sense of levity, that humour.
Well, I think it's very important, but you don't see a lot of it in contemporary art. I mean, it's actually difficult to make a picture that's funny, that's not silly. And I'm not saying that this picture's not silly. I'm saying it is rather amusing. But I mean, you can end up, if you try it on, you can end up like a sort of a limp Norman Rockwell, not good. or you can end up with something. I mean. One of the interesting artists that ever made things that were amusing is Claes Oldenburg, the American sculptor who made the soft drum kit and those things. And they are
hard to play.
Incredibly sort of funny and stupid, but they tell you something about something, you know.
Now, Tim, one of the things, of course, that has been discussed at ad nauseum this week, of course, is the absence of a face. This is a work where your face is not necessarily in the actual figure itself. It's kind of flying off towards the right-hand side as well. How have you been responding to the myriad comments that you've been getting about the lack of face in... Have you lost face? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
You work at the ABC, do you? That other fella there that makes those puns in the morning, he's good.
God, it's very punny. Continue.
I had somebody ask me that and saying, well, you know, I said, look, it's not a particularly original idea. And unfortunately, I didn't realise how old I was, because I said, don't you know anything about the Invisible Man? And of course, the only way you could see the Invisible Man was that was when he put his bandages and dark glasses on. You know, how dumb was he? He didn't know anything about this.
But do you think that don't you think that the idea that portraiture and your painting does represent this, it needs to be given a bit of a kick up the proverbial in some ways, that we need to rethink what the idea of portraits actually can be, and your painting does suggest this, does show us this?
Oh, I'd be in agreement with that. I think unless portraiture is allowed to expand in the way it does, it becomes almost a sort of a silly activity. I think what we're seeing in the last decade is the most extraordinary advances in reproductive technology, and you can now make the most extraordinary images using photography. And I've always had and I certainly wouldn't want to be critical of other painters, but I probably have a little bit of insight, having been on the board for 9 years, that there is a problem when well, I'll give you an example. If you take an orange and you draw an orange, the size of an orange roughly, so you know the diameter of 2 inches, maybe 3 inches, there are technical problems that you can solve quite easily with your own hand. You try and make an orange the size of a beach ball, and you run into all sorts of problems that can really almost only be solved with a camera. And so I've never really been in favour of, shall we say, the big balloon head. It seems to be completely anachronistic, and I think it's one of the reasons that it's become a little bizarre.
Okay. Can we talk a bit about then the actual work itself? Because for me, it's interesting because there was a similar, in some ways, work that had no face in it last year that you entered, which was called Moon Boy, Self-Portrait as a Young Man. And then there was also this series called In Absentia, which again was figures without a face, or it was just clothes floating around. And I suppose I'm leading to some of the ideas that are coming into these sorts of works. We've talked about that they're almost a parody, I suppose, or a self-parody, to use the tautology. But there's also these other ideas of mortality and, you know, once the body is finished, that's all we have left is the trappings of our lives. Is that what was going on with you?
That's how it really started. There's not a soul in this room that hasn't suffered that type of loss. And it's curiously poignant, but at the same time completely and absolutely fruitless to lament it. It's an absolute fact of life. I mean, as Barry Humphries used to say, you know, thinking about burning mummy's things in a rather cold way. But the fact is that you end up with a pile of clothes, essentially, that's left, and they are particularly poignant for the people involved. And so, with remembering certain people, I was then just constructed these sort of clothes in the air. If they are on a clothesline, and again, I mean, a lot of clothesline pictures are faceless portraits in a way. Clothes can be terribly emotive and evoke the memory of a person very completely, even in very old, ancient societies, tribal societies, objects. It's almost like black magic in a way.
Downstairs, your picture has a lot of things that represent you, including smudge, cute smudge. Is there anything that you left out? Any object that's not on there? On your shell?
on my shoulders.
Yeah, on your shoulders, way down, Sisyphus.
Yeah, my wife, mortgage.
That'd be a family photo then. The mortgage.
Well, the new
picture
wife.
Picture of me,
yeah.
Tim. Yeah. Picture of me as well. Yeah.
Well, on certain days there, Fenella, no doubt about that.
Just quickly, I know that this painting is after Bosch. It's influenced by a picture of course, from Hieronymus Bosch. But why is it important for you as an artist? And you're a very well-respected artist here in Australia, of course, and internationally. But to think about other artists, particularly, to look back and to consider.
Well, I don't know that there is an artist worth his salt his or her salt that really doesn't do that. I mean, it's part of one's education, and Hieronymus Bosch is no more important to me than any other great artist, really. It's just that particular picture that he painted had sort of resonance. But there are numerous other pictures, but I was always interested in these pictures with people sort of lugging things for some reason, and I had this memory of, I don't know whether anybody here would remember it, the Saturday Evening Post. I mean, it's gone out of circulation with Life magazine donkeys years ago, but when I was a kid, it was a very informative magazine, and there was an advertisement for Prudential life insurance, and there was a soldier who had everything, including a bathtub, stacked on him, and I never forgot it because I was looking at this thing and thinking of this poor individual. And I just remembered I have like most artists, I've got a visual memory. So it's got to do with a lot of things, and thinking of that and then trying to work out the stance of the pilgrim or the wayfarer in the Hieronymus Bosch picture is an indecisive stance, if you like.
But yours is more decisive.
Well,
Do you feel?
yeah, well, yes, it is, isn't it? It's much more decisive, and also the ludicrous optimism of the head, not the face, but everything's there. But just there's left out bits that you don't need
Anymore. You said in an interview once that the reason you paint is because you don't know much about anything else. Is that true?
Oh, I might have been a little modest, but I've learned a few things. But from when I used to copy cowgirls from Vargas calendars. When I was really quite young.
What's a Vargas calendar?
You don't really
I don't need
not
to know
know
that,
Vargas?
do I? No. Okay.
Vargas was an American illustrator. They're terribly tame now.
Yeah.
The
It
illustrators
was pretty naughty back then.
quite naughty. They
Okay.
he was the artist that inspired the so-called American nose art on American bombers during the Second World War. So they're risque. They have frilly panties and things like that, and of course, very exciting for me. Then, now.
I really loved seeing there was a story on television on the ABC last year that actually interviewed you, and in that story we see you working on the histrionic wayfarer. And this obviously was 6 months ago or so. So how long does it take you to paint a picture? Really? Because there's another painting, I must say, in the Absentia series of Reg Livermore. It's dated 2001 to 2009.
Yeah, well, that's when it started.
Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah, well, 8 years it was a failure. I couldn't work how to do it. In the Reg Livermore portrait, I just made... Sometimes you could make an initial error with a painting, and usually it has to do with the fact that you got something wrong. In the case with Reg's picture, I was trying to make it a dark painting, like a Max Meldrum painting, so that Reg was coming out of the dark. And of course, although that's part of the character, it's got little to do with Reg, who's a sort of quite a sunny person. At the moment I worked out that the canvas shape was wrong. It was too narrow. It was 6 by 2 foot, where it needed to be 6 foot 6 by 3. Once I organised that and then worked out that I wanted it outside in the daylight, it all just fell into place.
So sometimes the ease of painting for you is easy, but sometimes it's difficult. There are stumbling blocks that you encounter.
Well, yeah, some of them are quite easy, but you get better at it as you get older. You do learn. I mean, and you don't make quite as many errors. But having said that, sometimes an idea is completely ill-conceived, and it just doesn't work. Quite often it's an idea that might be better off written down.
So tell me about the histrionic wayfarer. I mean, when did you start on this work? What was the sort of the time frame? I mean, I know, for example, another person I read who'd seen the work said it looked completely finished to me, but you were still going at it.
Yeah, it's quite a neurotic painting, really. I mean, it's almost fetishistic in a sense, because I kept going back to it over and over and over again, adding something, taking something out, putting a banana in the pocket, those sorts of things, putting a pencil in the pocket, adding a brush. And in fact, as I told one of those naughty journalists who never get it quite right, that the dog was quite late in the game, because I didn't know what to do with the top of the pack. And I was very hesitant because, I think adding an animal to a portrait's a pretty cheap trick. Although if you look at a lot of portraits...
Why is it a cheap trick?
Well, it makes it charming.
Oh.
It does make it charming. And the number of whippets, if anybody in this room's ever owned a whippet, they'll know what I mean. They're not really dogs, they're a type of affectionate rodents. And you see them a lot in painting of portraits, European portraits, for a couple of
Whippets.
100 years.
At the moment, I think it's birds. There's birds in every single picture at the moment.
Birds?
Yeah, you should consider it. Just don't take my advice, that's for sure. Actually, talking about...
I did consider it, but it was a chicken.
Just talking
and
about
I couldn't
dogs,
work out how to balance it on the head.
Can we get back to Smudge for a second? I'm actually sad Smudge is not here.
I'm not.
Oh. And Smudge is with you every day, isn't she? I mean, the interesting thing is that, for a lot of artists or writers or whoever, having a dog as a companion or an animal, a pet, can be incredibly fulfilling. For you, why is that, I suppose, having that constant breathing object in your studio?
Well, she's a bit of a slut. She usually comes up with some biscuits in the morning and then disappears and comes back later to sleep. But it's the companionship, isn't it? I mean, and they're uncritical and they give you unquestioning affection. And if you work on your own, it's quite welcome.
Just before we sort of wrap up in a second, Tim, I mean, you moved to the country, was it 20 years ago?
Yeah, something. Moved back.
Moved back to... because you grew up in the country. Okay, so you moved back to the country and you'd been in the city for so many times, and a lot of your work that we're very familiar with shows us that expansive space, the desert and the horizons and the sea and the sky. Living in the country for you today, how does it continue to give you that freedom to express and to paint?
Oh, that's quite complex. Simply said, I suppose, is that the temptations to do something else are less in the country. And as you get older, of course, there's no point being in town. Everybody knows the story, and all you become in the end is a bore. And if you're a little thirsty, as quite a lot of artists have been historically, you could waste an enormous amount of time. And if you like people's company, especially intelligent company, you could waste days. And being in the country, you're away from those types of temptations. And as you get older, the air's better. I mean, there's a lot to be said for it. It's changed an enormous amount, though, the country. I mean, see, I grew up in a place called Wellington, and in those days, we didn't have television. So the high point of the week was Smokey Dawson on the radio. And so I was really raised on radio, and anybody that's raised on radio, especially the old serials, they are terrific for imagination. And so when television came in, and it actually does pertain to your questioning about the face, my father brought me down to be interviewed to go to school, and I was quite young, I think I was 9, and he left me in what's called a private hotel in King's Cross. I don't know where he went, but the kind people there, they gave me a dinner and then sent me back down to the room. But I'd say they also showed me television, and on television that night, it was in black and white, was The Invisible Man, and
here we are again.
Yeah, but the thing was that when I went into the room, they'd left the light on, and as I closed the door, I looked over and I froze, and I stood there for about half an hour because there was a curtain and there was a pair of shoes sticking out from under the curtain. I finally worked out that they were my father's shoes, but it was quite frightening, because
he was looking after you.
Well, there'd been in the television program, there'd been a man, a dangerous man hiding behind a curtain. So maybe it has to do with that.
Maybe it's got something to do with that. Just quickly, what's on the easel right now at the moment?
On the anvil?
No.
The what?
Hang on. What's on the easel?
Oh, the easel.
We can talk about the anvil later.
Nothing.
Oh, good.
I've got I've got some pictures that I'm working on about Antarctica, but I've started them, and I did quite a lot of very small paintings when I was down there, in oil colour because acrylic just freezes. But
you travelled to Antarctica last year. Yes.
Yeah. But again, it's one of those topics that you've got to get it right, otherwise it's a cliche. And at the moment, I've got too much viridian in it, and they're a bit too odd, a bit too sort of, a bit too Disney-like. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing them. And I must say it's a pleasure to speak with you this evening, and congratulations again for your Archibald win, and please thank Tim Storrier.
Thank you. And thank you, Fenella.